I use gouache in two different ways. In the studio, it's liquid, poured out onto the palette. I use it fresh from the tube, mix on a big mixing space. It's luxurious. But most of the time I'm painting outside. It's filled with 16 colors of gouache, including white. I've been using this combination for maybe over a year now, almost exclusively. I do experiment more in the studio with different brands and color combinations, but I feel like for me to really learn my colors, to get a good feel for the consistency of some colors, like burnt umber is a little more stiff than cobalt turquoise light. Knowing these small, subtle differences makes life easier when I'm painting outside. So using the same colors for months, if not a year or more, is the only way I can do it. So now that it's been many, many months that I haven't changed a color in this palette, I thought it was time to finally share what I'm working with. I already have a few videos about setting up a dried gouache palette like this, where you pour the gouache in, you let it kind of dry or stiffen up a little bit for a few days before you take it outside. Because otherwise, if it's liquid and if this tips upside down in your bag or in the car, it's gonna get everywhere. But high quality brands will reactivate with water and still be very opaque and saturated. I get this question all the time. Is one brand better in a dried palette like this? What's the best brand? And now that I've tried many, honestly, it doesn't make a huge difference. What matters more is the color. Certain pigments dry faster, certain pigments dry a little bit harder, more stiff, a little bit harder to re-wet. Certain colors tend to crumble a little bit faster than others. I'm using this pretty regularly, so it never gets to the point where it's completely cracking and crumbling and falling out of my palette. If you use it often enough, you're spritzing water, you're using water in each color, it's just keeping it just soft enough and it's fine. So if you don't like to paint outside or use dried gouache like this, these color recommendations still stand in the studio. And again, while I do experiment with lots of different combinations, and I'm usually using a very limited palette, like 5 colors, I think that if you bought a set of these colors, you would be so happy and you could paint anything you could even imagine. I'm also sharing a blog post in the description below which lists out all the colors, shares the swatches of each one, and also it includes equivalents in other brands. So if you don't use the brand I use, I will list some alternatives in different brands that I know of. Even though I don't know all of the brands and all the colors, I think that will at least help. So you can get your hands on something if you live in a country where you have access to different things. Depending where you live, price can be very different across brands. So what works for me and what I can afford might be completely different where you live. So hopefully that blog post helps with that. So I technically have room for 12 main colors here and 3 or more along here because I have these expansion pans, so I can fit 3 of this size or these ones which divide it even more. I always keep at least one of these full of white, and I've actually realized it would be so nice to have 2 of these be white because look how dirty this is. It gets so contaminated by all the different colors. So I was thinking I could maybe even have 3. So it could be like this one would just be for when I'm doing lighter tones like the yellows. Then I could have one for my blues, maybe greens, and then one for reds and browns or earthy tones. But I don't know. I'm kind of playing with that still in my head. I've had this large pan of buff titanium here for a long time because I almost treat it like white. So I'm kind of only considering this area right now while I'm choosing colors. These will just be a bonus on the side. It truly is pure chaos when I'm doing this part of the process because I'm swatching all my colors that I'm considering. I will also pull out old swatches of different brands that I have in my cupboard. So the brands I'm considering for today are the Winsor Newton Designer Gouache, the Schmincke Horadam Gouache, and the Shinhan Designer Gouache. I've used these three the most out of all of my brands, so I have a better feeling for how they perform, and I've been using them in the dried palette for over a year now, so I know that they're going to be fine. I'm in the process of using up all of my older Schmincke Horadam gouache, so once these tubes are gone, they're gone. I'm not buying any more. I've said many times that this is my favorite gouache, but it's really expensive here. Plus, they use oxgall in their binder recipe, which is something that I am avoiding. And the other brands that I use don't use that. There are two colors in the Horadam gouache that I absolutely love. They're probably two of my all-time favorites. And that would be the Titanium Gold Ochre and the Helio Turquoise. They're just very unique colors, and they're gorgeous. And I'm going to use the English Venetian Red. I don't have these three colors in any of my other brands right now, so yeah, it kind of works out in that sense. But I have so many tubes of Winsor Newton and Shinhan, all of this, that I think it's going to take me a little while to narrow it down, so I'll just speed it up for you and give you some thoughts, I think. I'm not always trying to reinvent the wheel when I fill my palette. There are some colors that pretty much live permanently on there, like lemon yellow, ultramarine, and quinacridone magenta. But sometimes I just want to play with something a little different, or my aesthetic has slightly shifted and I want to lean more towards earthy tones or just different variations. But I often find that while I give myself room to experiment in the studio with different colors, I sometimes discover a combination that I absolutely love. For the most part, this palette has stayed the same for a couple years, with only a few colors changing now and then. And I find it so funny how I can fall in and out of love with different colors over the years. There were two colors this time that were kind of niggling in the back of my mind, and I thought maybe I'll give them a chance again. So I will reveal those two colors in a moment, but another thing I do during this process is to refill some of the pans that were running a little low. Because I find it's really helpful to keep them topped up so that they don't crack and fall out as often. Even though, again, I'm using this palette so frequently that rarely happens. But the lower the paint gets in the pan, the more likely it is to crumble and fall out. Especially if you drop your palette, which I kind of do often. Quick little tip, if you're making a palette like this, I recommend closing the lid very lightly so there's just a tiny bit of airflow, and set it aside somewhere where you can just let it be. It will dry a little bit slower, and I find that helps avoid as much cracking, and then you can refill it continuously over the next couple weeks. I also like to make a mini swatch card, which I will stick to the outside of the palette, which always reminds me what the colors are going to look like when they dry. like to have two yellows on my palette, and lemon yellow is a permanent resident, earning its spot with its mixing power for crisp, cool mixes, and it's excellent for a more intense yellow wash and for spring greens. My second yellow changes, but usually it's a warm or more subdued yellow like Naples yellow or yellow ochre. This time I'm going with my old favorite, titanium gold ochre. I probably only have about 2 more pans worth of this, so I'm definitely going to savor it. It's great for orange tints and also mixing really beautiful earthy greens. Next, we have a color returning after years in the cupboard. Burnt sienna was once a favorite of mine, especially for its intensity and mixing strength. It reminds me of quinacridone burnt orange when diluted, and it works so well as a base for rocks, sand, forest floors, bark, brick, and so much more. Burnt umber keeps its spot thanks to its versatility. I use it to mute down my colors in all areas of the landscape. A tiny touch of this will help create beautiful stormy skies, and it's just an all-around performer. Next, we have English red, an earthy red hue, which compared to burnt sienna is much more opaque and leans more red than orange. It's a little more muted in its mass tone, but also dilutes down to a lovely red. And I like it when I need to create rich grays and browns for beaches and rocks. And as part of a limited palette, it helps me to keep my overall colors more natural looking. Quinacridone magenta is another permanent color on my palette, proving its worth year after year, both as a light, fast, brilliant pink and a red replacement. I love it for its mixing strength and especially for creating the most gorgeous purples. I often use it as an underpainting because I love little pops of hot pink to show through in my final painting. I use buff titanium as a warm white versus the stark coolness of titanium white. It's useful as a way to both desaturate and lighten my colors, especially for distant elements in a landscape or a bright sunny or hazy scene. And it's a go-to color for sand, rocks, and even muted greens in my trees and fields. Ultramarine remains my workhorse blue. Its versatility is hard to match in landscapes as it's beautiful in skies, water, and it mixes well with everything on my palette, from rich greens, purples, and grays. I often use it when I need a cool gray base for rocks and architecture, and it actually appears quite often in an urban environment on its own. I like to have a phthalo blue of some kind on my palette, and this time I'm going with helio turquoise. As most of you know, phthalos are notorious for taking over a mix because of their intensity, but I find this one to handle a little bit better, and it's just the perfect tint of blue for adding life to my oceans, reflections, and it even creates gorgeous purples. Returning year after year is my love for turquoise, and it doesn't get much better than cobalt turquoise light. And out of all the brands I've tried, I love the Winsor Newton version. I often use it as a diluted sky color to differentiate from the ultramarine mixes in the landscape below, and it's perfect for pops of light in a sunny wave or even as a base color for summer foliage and grasses. Shadow green pale is a color that caught me a little off guard, and now it's my go-to for painting muted greens. This gray-leaning green is especially great for areas of shadow in a forest where there's still a bit of light bouncing around, but you don't want a saturated green. I also love it for mosses, leaves, and just about any other use of green. Next, we have a second surprise color, the return of Perylene Black, a very dark, muted green which goes hand in hand with my sentiments about shadow green pale. I had removed it years ago because I found I was just relying too heavily on this color, especially for painting trees. But now that I'm better at color mixing, I find it to be very useful for so many landscape elements, especially when mixed with my primaries. And last but definitely not least is lilac or lavender. This convenience mix is something I use constantly for distant elements in the landscape, but I also love a touch of this color in skies and architecture and tree shadows and so much more. Hello from 2 weeks in the future from my last clip I filmed, which is technically still your past. So I have been using this palette for a couple weeks now. Obviously I let it dry. I did the whole thing where I pack the color in. If you haven't seen the videos I shared about how to set up and use a dried gouache palette, I recommend watching those first. But this is how it looks after a couple weeks. I love giving my palette a nice scrub, a nice refresh, and I hope I will be able to keep this a little tidier this year. I ended up adding the buff titanium to the side pans. I gave myself 2 big white pans because, again, I just contaminate those so quickly. It's nice to have a couple. I'm going to be using this pretty much every day during April. I'm once again going to be participating in Pleinairpril, which is painting outside every day during April. It's amazing and fun and difficult, and I record as much as I can and share that with you all here. So if you like painting, seeing videos of painting outside, or if you like gouache or Scotland or any of the things that I share here, definitely subscribe. I've been toying with the idea of doing multiple videos a week just to keep you all more updated because so much happens during April. I feel like I'm learning quickly. I am obviously painting a lot and it's just nice to share more frequently. Like sharing a few more videos a week would help me kind of keep the momentum going a little bit, maybe something to look forward to. But I'm so excited about these colors and I'm really looking forward to seeing what I gravitate more towards throughout April, and if I have any that I'm like falling back on constantly. I want to experiment a little bit more and like lean into a couple different limited palettes throughout the month. As you see me like flapping this around, one final tip is that I do put a piece of sticky tack under each pan so that if I do drop it, especially face down, they're not going to go flying out of the palette. That used to happen to me all the time. And as a reminder, there is a blog post in the description with all of these colors. You can find links to buy them if you want. It's also got the pigment information and a bunch of other tips and swatching cards, so you can just kind of get a better feel for them together. These colors are Akira approved, aren't they? Yes. He's my little studio buddy. He's always in here. So I am really looking forward to taking you with me outside during April and just seeing what we do. All right, thank you for hanging out with me today. I hope you are inspired to go out there and paint. I will see you next time.